Good morning and welcome to Trevor Phillips on Sunday. The best things in life are free, according to the first line of a famous Motown song. As far as I know, no chance of the Exchequer has ever sung that verse. Healthcare, education, defence, energy, transport, just about anything we need costs. The keeper of the government's purse and collector of taxes is more likely to be belting out the chorus, "Give me money." This week, Rishi Sunak reveals his latest budget. Some of it we know, cash for early years, for education and for transport. But is it going to be enough? And even if it is, who's paying? And can we be sure about anything with COVID still sweeping the land? Our guest this morning may help us find out. In just a moment, I'll speak to the man himself. Chancellor Rishi Sunak will join me and we'll look at his plans for the taxes you'll pay and how he'll spend the money. We'll also hear from his opposite number, Rachel Reeves, who'll need to respond to the budget and spending review on Wednesday. Never an easy task. With much of the focus on that phrase again, levelling up, and transport spending in cities across England, we'll speak to West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Brabin. Well, the other big story exercising mind here in Westminster is the resurgence of COVID and concerns about the booster vaccine rollout. So we'll speak to Professor Adam Finn, who sits on the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, and fears about rising COVID hospitalisations plus the usual winter stresses mean hospitals and staff are already under huge pressure. So we'll speak to the President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, Katherine Henderson. But first, let's focus on Wednesday's budget, which will also include announcements on the government's spending plans for the next 3 years. So it really is a crucial moment for Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who joins me now. Good morning, Chancellor.
Good morning.
You've already announced that there's going to be a £7 billion for new transport projects outside London. Can you confirm that just £1.5 billion of that money hasn't been announced previously?
So the transport money that we announced is a combination of two things. One, we'd previously announced an overall envelope to improve how people get around our big cities. We wanted our cities, whether that's in the West Midlands or in Teesside or Greater Manchester, to have the same type of transport settlements that London's always enjoyed, where locally elected mayors can take a pot of money and decide how best to spend it to help all their residents. And we previously announced £4.2 billion for that. What we've actually done is top that up, as you said, by £1.5 billion, but then crucially give out the allocations for in that envelope, where are all the bits going to go? So it's going to create trams over here, bus links over here, road improvements over there. So whether you're in West Yorkshire, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, Teesside, local residents are going to see improvements over the next few years as their leaders are given the same type of power and funding that London has always enjoyed. So it's a great example of levelling up in practice, and it's ultimately just going to create growth in all of these places. OK,
so that's £1.5 billion worth of levelling up. We're going to talk to Tracy Brabin a bit later, the Mayor of West Yorkshire. Can you assure her that the money that she's going to get, 830 million, I think, will fund a new stop in Bradford from the new Northern Powerhouse rail line, plus an HS2 extension to Leeds?
So more broadly, and you'll speak to Tracy later, and we had comments, I think, yesterday, whether it's from Andy Burnham or indeed Andy Street in the West Midlands, our local mayors, actually all warmly welcoming, I think, the funding that was announced.
Everybody likes money, but let's see what it's going to buy.
So I think your specific question actually relates to something different. So what the money announced yesterday is about what we call intracity transportation. That's about how do we get people who live in and around a city to be able to get into the middle of it and out again easily. We actually don't do as well as we should do on that. If you look at cities like, say, Marseille or Lyon in France, it takes virtually no time at all or within half an hour for people to get from the out to the in. That journey time in some of our cities outside of London can take twice as long. And that's not great. It's not great for creating jobs, not great for people's quality of life. That's what we're trying to fix with these settlements that we've announced. What you're talking about is something different, and that's about how we connect up our towns and cities to each other. Now, that's going to be part of something called the Integrated Rail Plan, and plans for that will be announced shortly. But we have committed to improving the links between all our great cities across the north, for example, between Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds. Bradford will obviously be a part of that as well.
Yeah, Dan Jarvis, who is the mayor in elsewhere in Yorkshire, was saying yesterday that he's looking forward to some money for the extension of HS2. And Tracy Brabin's quite specific, whether it's this package of money this weekend or the 3-year spending review. She wants a stop in Bradford and she wants HS2 to go to Leeds. Is that going to happen?
So that will be part of the integrated rail plan, which will spell out our plans to connect up all our towns and cities, not just across the north, but also across the Midlands. It wouldn't be right for me to speculate on that now, but what I can tell you is people will see enormous improvements in journey times as we deliver what the Prime Minister said when he was first elected, an infrastructure revolution in this country. And why is this important? Because it's all very well to talk about the money we're spending. It's important because it creates jobs, it creates prosperity. If we can better connect up our towns and cities, that's going to allow our economy to grow, it's going to increase productivity and allow people to access better paying jobs. You know, that's how we build a stronger economy in this country, and that's what next week's budget is all about. It's about building that stronger economy for the British people.
OK, we have to have people who can do the jobs, and you put some money into skills and education. Let's start at the very beginning. You are going to give 500 million years for early years education. Now, your Conservative predecessors cut the Sure Start programme by about £1.2 billion over the past decade. Is this 500 million an admission that that was just a mistake?
So what this money is about is actually addressing something probably slightly different, and there's been enormous work being done, and particularly by one of my colleagues, Andrea Leadsom, and also Fiona Bruce. And what they've showed very clearly, as the evidence does, that the very early years in young families' lives are critical, and that's where parents often struggle, and that's where actually we need to provide a little bit more attention. So what we're announcing is funding to create a network of family hubs, which are broader than Sure Start centres, and they bring together lots of different services for new parents. And for the first time, we're going to roll those out, and whether that's parenting programmes, support for mental health, help with very, very young children with things like numeracy and literacy as well. All those types of things we can bring together, help young parents at a difficult time. We know that that will make an enormous difference to those parents and those young families' lives. So I'm delighted that we're able to do this. And it's based on a lot of evidence and research that's been carried out over the last few years, which demonstrates this is an important thing to do.
Well, your predecessor, George Osborne, who was really principally responsible for taking a little bit more than £1 billion out of Sure Start. I mean, he's out of politics now, so you can say that was a mistake, can't you?
No, I think it's right to judge everyone by the context that they are doing their jobs in. And one thing that my predecessors, not just George, did was ensure that I actually had a very strong economy and strong set of public finances that I inherited. Now, that was really important because then when coronavirus came, which nobody knew about, I was able to respond in a comprehensive and generous fashion to support families, businesses and the country through the crisis. And actually part of my responsibility...
I'm talking about specific issues, George Start. It was an error.
No, you can pick on individual things, but overall, what my predecessors did was deliver a strong economy and a strong set of public finances, which we have now benefited from over the past year as we've responded and protected and supported people. Now, part of my job and part of what next week's budget is about is doing that again, is delivering that stronger economy, that stronger set of public finances, because whenever the next difficult thing comes along, I want to make sure whoever's sitting in this chair can do what I did over the last year, and that's the right thing for the country. It's the right thing for the British people to have that stronger economy to fall back on.
Well, let's keep talking about the spending, because there's quite a lot of it. You're announcing a skills package worth £3 billion. Now, a lot of this just replaces funds we would have got from the EU structural funds anyway. But where exactly is the new money in that £3 billion package?
So what you'll see all the details of this laid out this week. Now, we've talked a lot about building a high-wage economy. Now, the best way to do that is to give people opportunities to retrain, to upskill at any stage in their lives, and then get really well-paid jobs as a result of that. And we've got a suite of interventions to do that. The Prime Minister's Lifetime Skills Guarantee is one I could pick on as an example. We have around 10 million adults in this country who sadly don't have the equivalent of a level 3 qualification and an A-level equivalent qualification. Now, for the first time, the government will pay for those people to get that qualification. That's worth almost £3,000 a year in cost. But we know if we do that, those people are much more likely to get a job and earn more money. So that's one of the most important and powerful things we can do to help people earn more, create a better life for them and their families. That's why skills are important, and it's all part of building that stronger economy that I talked about, and that's what you'll see next week.
One of the biggest issues in building a stronger economy is productivity. Now, here's the problem. Pretty much every year we look at this. Whoever's Chancellor trumpets some huge sum for skills training to increase productivity. The IFS estimates that over the past 10 years, we spent £39.5 billion into adult training and skills. And here's what's happened as a result. I want to show you this, to the effect on productivity. I'm going to show you a graph which shows the increase in productivity over the last decade. The increase in productivity is as near zero as damn it. Until you've worked out why that money isn't making any difference, aren't we just throwing good money after bad?
No, there's lots of different things that go into increasing our productivity. Our plan for growth that we've set out involves investing in infrastructure, innovation and skills. I think of it like that. So infrastructure we've talked a little bit about actually earlier on in the programme. That's going to help drive up our productivity. Not to get technical about it, there's something called agglomeration economics, making sure that our cities can perform at their highest potential. So those investments will help us do that. We know that they will drive up. If you cluster all
the clever people and all the productive people in one place, you get more out of it.
No, it's not so much about the clever people. It's about for a given city, for it to maximise its potential, we need to make it easy for people to move around it. So that's what those investments will do, and we know that economically that will make a difference. So that's the infrastructure piece, for example. Skills we've just talked about, and giving people the tools they need to get better jobs, and we've got a range of things that we're doing there that we haven't done before, actually. The Prime Minister's Lifetime Skills Guarantee is new. Things like skills boot camps are new in this country, working with hundreds of employers to design 3 to 4 month courses with a job interview at the end, with proper employer engagement during the training. These are new interventions, and we think they're going to make a big difference. And then the last piece is innovation, is how do we build a high innovation economy that's going to be ready to embrace some of the technological change we're seeing. So there, it's investing in R&D, it's making sure our growing companies can get the capital they need, it's about making sure we attract talented people from abroad, it's about helping our companies grow. So our Help to Grow programme, again, we've never done something like this before. It's giving small and medium-sized companies mini MBAs, support with digital technology. I'm confident that all of those things are going to raise their productivity, and that chart that we saw will start to tick up.
But, Chancellor, isn't there a big elephant in the room here? I mean, you're saying all of this and you're offering the money and so on. Is one of the reasons that nothing changes is that in spite of all this money for training, the apprenticeship levy, huge, 2.7 billion, I think, 5,000 employers don't use it. 400 million worth of that levy expired, we understand, last year. And isn't the problem really the one that the Prime Minister and also your colleague, the Home Secretary, frequently talk about, which is that as long as employers can bring in cheap labour through immigration, they aren't going to invest in training and skills and raise productivity in the way that you want it to be raised?
Well, I wouldn't say that nothing has changed. And actually, I think some of the things that we've already put in place are starting to yield benefits.
Graph is still flat.
That graph is over the last 10 years. But let me just look at the time that I've had this job and what we're seeing now. What we're seeing is record numbers of job vacancies. We're seeing employers wanting to hire. We're seeing businesses' intentions to invest growing again, partly aided by measures that we've taken like the super deduction, which is a huge tax incentive for businesses to invest in increasing their productivity. And we're seeing people's wages rise. Real wages today are 3.5% higher than they were before the crisis. So actually, all the things that we put in place, the plan for jobs that I've been on this show talking about a lot over the last year and a half, that plan for jobs is working. People are seeing the benefits of it. And I'm confident that if we continue to deliver on investing in infrastructure, innovation, our skills, we will see our growth rise. And next week's budget will demonstrate that plan in action. We will build that stronger economy, we'll drive up our economic growth and productivity, and people are going to feel that in higher living standards and a better quality of life.
All right, let's talk about what some of your colleagues in the Conservative Party say, which is that you're not really a very Conservative Chancellor at all. You said the Prime Minister said in the party conference that you would be the first government in decades not to duck hard decisions. You'd be radical and optimistic. And let's see if that's actually true. For example, nobody wants to keep the system of business rates. You said in your 2019 manifesto that we will cut the burden of tax on business by reducing business rates, and you promised a fundamental review. 2 years now, are you going to be telling us on Wednesday that you're going to get rid of business rates?
Well, I will talk on Wednesday about the conclusion of that fundamental review, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that.
Oh, it's actually concluded?
So, yes,
we will get an outcome from this review.
We will get an outcome from the review. We've said that we would conclude the review in the autumn, and you'll see that. I mean, but on business rates, important to remember this is a government that's put in place the small business rates reduction, which means a third of all properties don't pay any business rates at all anymore. And over the past year and a half, through coronavirus, we've delivered about £16 billion worth of tax cuts on business rates to help hospitality and retail businesses get through all of this. And in terms of the review and reform, I think you've got the Shadow Chancellor on later on in the show. I mean, there are people who say you should just abolish business rates, which I think is what the Labour Party position is.
Indeed,
business rates obviously,
business
rates obviously does raise £25 billion. I'm sure you'll be asking her, well, what is a system that would replace that? If you are going to just stand up and say you're going to abolish it,
that's okay. I'll do that interview. What about your? Well,
as I said, we've delivered short-term relief during the last 18 months through coronavirus. That support extends through to next year. We'll be talking a little bit more about the future and some things that we can do in business rates next week in the budget. But that's all part of a budget that, as I said, it builds a stronger economy, and you will see us supporting business. And there are lots of different ways to support business. Business rates is one of them. Incentives to invest, like our super deduction, the biggest ever tax cut for businesses that this country's seen, and that's creating a strong climate for investment, and that's going to create jobs as well, helping small companies with mini MBAs, digital skills help to grow, I mentioned, helping them take on new staff, young people, through the Kickstart scheme. Lots of different things we're doing to help business.
But you understand where I'm going here, because it's reported that this week the former Prime Minister David Cameron told Mr Johnson that at least in my day, we cut taxes. You are not doing that at all. You're presiding over the highest tax burden since the post-war period, and we can have another look at this. The IFS says that you've got a sustained level of public spending, 42% of GDP, and it's the highest since 1985. And actually, look at the graph since the post-war period, 1950. You're still pretty high, 35%. That's not the low tax conservatism that the Prime Minister promised, and you yourself said you stand for.
Yes, and of course I do stand for that, and that's what I would want to deliver, and that's where my instincts are. But you also have to take a step back, Trevor, and think, well, what have I and the government had to grapple with over the past year and a half? We've had the biggest economic shock that we've experienced in 300 years. We've had the need, rightly, to come and support the country through that, which has obviously been enormously costly. It drove our borrowing up to levels we haven't seen since World War II, just on the other side of that chart. And we've got a strong ambition to invest in public services and drive up our growth by investing in infrastructure, innovation and skills, all the things that we've talked about earlier. So those are the things I'm grappling with. And I've got to take the world as it comes. I wish I hadn't had to deal with coronavirus and a once-in-300-year economic shock and all the damage that has done to our economy, and an NHS backlog that was stretching into the millions that we thought it was really important, rightly, to get some funding in to address. But those are the challenges that I'm grappling with, and I have to take those challenges and figure out, well, what's the right way to do that? And we've made some decisions, which I believe, although they are difficult, are the right decisions. They're the responsible decisions. And ultimately, we'll deliver on the things that people want to see us deliver on, and indeed build that strong economy for the future, which is going to drive growth and raise our living standards.
To sum up, what Johnsonism in economic terms right now looks like is tight fiscal control, squeeze on every department except maybe health, lots of universal credit, the £20 uplift, prospect of inflation at 4%, and by the way, less on public services when there's more demand, less in wage packets when prices are going up. Now, offer some of your colleagues at least some hope that that isn't the totality of Johnsonism and that there might be some tax cuts.
Well, what I tell you is this. Our focus over the last year and a half has been on delivering our plan for jobs. I'm pleased to say that plan has worked. with far fewer people unemployed than we feared, the economy recovering faster than people thought. So that's good news. That plan for jobs has worked. And looking forward, next week's budget is about the future. It's about building that stronger economy for our country. You've asked, what does that mean? Well, it means a few things. It actually means very strong continued investment in public services. It means driving our future economic growth by investing in infrastructure, innovation and skills, the things we've talked about. It means giving businesses confidence through all the things we're going to do to support them. And lastly, it means supporting working families, as we have done through the last year. There are lots of different ways to support working families. But those things combined are what deliver a stronger economy for the British people, and that's what next week's budget is going to do.
OK, give your colleagues some hope. Rule out tax rises before the next election.
Trevor, you're asking me to do my budget live on your show, which, although it would be great, well, because I'm going to do it in Parliament on Wednesday.
All right. One last question. We have COP26 next week. One thing we know is no President Xi, no President Putin, no new restrictions on fossil fuels if the Australians and the Chinese, and to some extent the Saudis, though they're making a gesture, would have it. It's a bit of a shambles, isn't it?
No, I think that's not right at all. If you look at when we first took on the presidency of COP, I think about 30% of the global economy had climate targets in place, thanks in part to the great work of the Prime Minister and the COP President, Alok Sharma. That number has now gone up to 80% because there's a team of people demonstrating UK leadership on the world stage to try and get more people to sign up to targets. So I think that's actually a great success story before we've even got to the summit in Glasgow. And, you know, what you're going to see, particularly on the bit that I'm responsible for example, the finance side of it, I'm hosting a full day on Wednesday. We're having great turnout from finance ministers and financial companies from around the world, committed to transforming our financial system to make it fit for the future, to help with the transition. And there's great news there. If you look at London just this week, the UK has been named best place in the world for green finance. We issued our second sovereign green bond, which now makes us the largest, the third largest issuer of sovereign green bonds anywhere in the world. And we've only been going a month. So, you know, actually, there's lots to celebrate. And actually, I think COP will be a big success. OK, Chancellor, thank you. I'm looking forward to, I know you're a music fan, looking forward to seeing what tune you sing on Wednesday. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, responding to the budget as the opposition is never easy. You don't have sight of the plans for long, and you don't have the Treasury's bean counters to help you. But an election could be as little as 18 months away, and if Labour wants to be seen as a government in waiting, it'll need to give us some specifics at times like this. So let's give Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves the chance to just do that now.
Good morning.
Good morning, Shadow Chancellor. Presumably you welcome the £7 billion worth of investment, which incidentally is going to benefit your constituency in Leeds.
Well, let's hope so. But what we see from this government is lots of announcements and much less delivery. Northern Powerhouse Rail, that would benefit Leeds and Bradford and Manchester and other towns and cities across Yorkshire, was first announced 7 years ago. It's been announced 60 times since then, and there's still not a single spade in the ground or train on the rails. It's not good enough. And the government are going to make more announcements this week. But we're sick of, in the north, having announcements without the delivery on the ground. And we want to see concrete action to match the rhetoric of this government. That's really important for all of us in the north of England.
But your Labour colleagues, Tracy, Brabin and Andy Burnham, have been rather positive about this announcement. In fact, Andy Burnham said yesterday, this is not a day for negativity. Aren't you being a bit mean?
Well, of course, new money is welcome. But as I say, Trevor, it's got to be backed up with actual action. And Northern Powerhouse Rail, the eastern leg of HS2, the dismal state that many of our bus services in, with cuts over the last few years and higher fares, all of those things need addressing. And it's of course welcome always to have more investment. But if that investment isn't backed up with actual delivery, it's really not worth the paper it's written on. And that is the frustration in many towns and cities across the north of England, that while big grand projects get delivered elsewhere in the country, they're few and far between in our towns and cities. And Northern Powerhouse Rail, I think, is the best example of a huge gaping chasm now between the rhetoric of the government and the actual delivery for people on the ground.
OK, well, look, would you give a tick at least to the 500 million for early years education, which is a thing I know from your parliamentary career that you care about quite a lot?
Well, I just would say to the Chancellor, have you ever heard of Sure Start? Because that is what your governments over the last 11 years have cut. And it's all well and good saying we're going to invest in these family parks, but thousands of children's centres and Sure Start centres that were proud features of our communities, especially some of our poorest communities, have long gone. And Tessa Jowell and Harriet Harman and Yvette Cooper and others in previous Labour governments who made those happen, I think there's a real feeling that if you hadn't have taken all that away, imagine what difference it could have made to the lives of young people and to their parents. And this pale imitation, which doesn't even take us back to where we were in 2010, I think is an insult to all those people who created investment and made Sure Start happen in the first place. And it was such a proud achievement of the last Labour government. And it really was an act of criminality to rip that all up, only to now, 11 years later, create a pale imitation of it.
I am frequently saying to you and your colleagues, what would you do? And complaining that you don't give me an answer. But in fact, this morning, you've already said that you would cut VAT on domestic energy supplies at a cost, you estimate, of £1 billion. I think that's interesting. Who's going to tell Andy Burnham that if you were Chancellor, he wouldn't be getting the transport improvements, which coincidentally cost about £1 billion, because you want to spend it on energy?
Well, no one would have to say that to Andy Burnham. I would say to Andy Burnham, we'll invest in the transport in Greater Manchester and across the north of England and give you the powers to do that, because too many decisions are still made in Whitehall and Westminster and not in the towns and cities and regions of our country. And we want to devolve more powers to Andy, to Tracy, to Dan Jarvis and to our other great metro mayors around the country. We've been clear about how we would pay for this cut in VAT, but let me just say why it's so important. But people are facing now a tough winter, with the prices of everything going up, not least our gas and electricity bills, and everybody is feeling the pinch. When we pay our gas and electricity bills each month, 5% of that bill goes directly to the taxman. And what Labour are saying is let's reduce that rate of VAT on gas and electricity bills from 5% to 0% for 6 months to get us through this winter period. And that would be an immediate and automatic reduction to the bills of every single family and pensioner across our country. And we would pay for that by using the VAT receipts that have come in higher than forecast by over £2 billion over the last few months, not least because prices are so much higher than they were forecast. Let's use that additional revenue that has flowed into the Treasury these last few months to make that important reduction in VAT on gas and electricity bills to ease that pressure on people who are struggling right now with the rising cost of living at the same time that taxes are going up.
But I suspect that extra money has already been allocated elsewhere in the Chancellor's plan. So if you're not going to find it from Andy's money or Tracy Brabin's 830 million or the 830 million for the FE skills budget or T-levels, where is this actually going to be? Or is this the magic money tree turning up again?
Trevor, you're asking me what Labour would do if it was our budget on Wednesday. And our priority would be easing the cost of living crisis, helping businesses who have had a torrid 18 months, and addressing some of the long-term challenges that we face with the climate crisis, but also our plans to buy, make and sell more in Britain. And if it was our budget on Wednesday, we would be using those additional VAT receipts to cut VAT on gas and electricity bills, because we know what a difficult time so many families and also pensioners are facing.
But if I may say so,
with worries about rising prices and worries about rising gas and electricity bills. And that is Labour's priority, and that is what Labour would do at the budget.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chancellor, but last time you were on, you told me that you would abolish business rates at a stroke. That will cost £25 billion. OK, you might be able to find a little bit of underspending and so on, but it's not going to count to £25 billion. You haven't got the money.
On business rates, what we've said is that next year, instead of increasing business rates, like this government planned to do, we would freeze business rates for all and we would extend the small business rates relief. And we would pay for that by increasing the digital services tax on firms who have done well these last 18 months as people's spending patterns have changed. That would bring in just over £2 billion, and that would enable us to freeze rates and extend small business rates relief. But we know these problems run deeper than just some tinkering around the edges in 1 year only. And that's why Labour have committed to abolish business rates and replace it with a fairer form of business property taxation. What do I mean by that? First of all, I mean
very
that
briefly,
high street
if you
companies
wouldn't
and
mind.
small businesses, the high street businesses and small businesses shouldn't have to bear such a disproportionate burden of business rates. Out-of-town warehouses, for example, are taxed at a much lower rate than high street businesses. But we've also got a situation where some of our big digital companies are not paying corporation tax in this country. The global minimum rate of corporation tax, the receipts from that, should ease the burden of business rates on high street and small businesses. That would be Labour's priority.
I'm sorry to stop you, Chancellor, but we have been over that ground before. But anyway, I'm grateful to you for your time this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, now, get a vaccine to keep your freedoms. That was the rather chilling warning from the Health Secretary this week, as he warned people to get booster jabs as COVID cases could soon hit 100,000 per day. The Prime Minister has issued what he says is a call to arms to encourage people to get a booster, amid real concern about the pace of the programme and whether we may now be headed for further restrictions. So let's speak to Professor Adam Finn. He sits on the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, which makes decisions about vaccinations. Adam Finn, we're seeing rising infection numbers, but hospitalisations aren't keeping pace. Does it really matter if we hit 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is of infections if the hospitalisations aren't rising?
But unfortunately, they are rising, and so are the numbers of deaths. And they will go up as the number of cases go up, because the virus will reach people who are vulnerable and who may get seriously ill. So I think, we can't be complacent about this. This is a worsening situation in an NHS which is already under enormous pressure.
We are hearing a great deal about waning immunity. How serious a problem do you think that is?
I think it exists. I think we are seeing an increased risk, particularly amongst older people who were immunised the longest time ago at the beginning of the year, with an increasing risk that they may be hospitalised. Actually, they're still relatively well protected, but of course there are large numbers of people, and with very high levels of spread of the virus, they are beginning to show up in hospital. The biggest risk, of course, is amongst those who've not been vaccinated at all, including younger adults, not just older people, who may get sick. And many of the hospitalised people we're seeing at the moment are, in fact, unimmunised people.
So for you, the issue is still getting everybody jabbed?
I think that the vaccine programme is doing a lot to make the situation much less severe than it would otherwise be. And the vaccines principally are very effective at stopping people from getting seriously ill. They're not so effective, unfortunately, at stopping infections altogether or stopping the virus from being spread about. They do have an effect on that, but they're not by themselves going to be enough at the present time to keep the spread of the virus under control. And we do need to see people continuing to make efforts to avoid contact, to avoid transmission, and to do other things as well as get vaccinated if we're going to stop this rise from going up further.
Let's just clarify one thing about the vaccination programme. The Prime Minister's pinning pretty much all his hopes on that success. Do you think he is right to float the idea of an extension of the booster programme to under 50s and by offering jabs at 5 months rather than the current 6 months and 1 week?
I think we need to be careful that we stick to the science here. Just giving more people vaccines, including people who maybe don't actually need the vaccines yet, could actually run the risk of making things worse rather than better. If you boost people before they actually need the vaccine, it is in some senses a waste of vaccine, but also it means that you're immunizing them earlier and they may make a smaller response to the vaccine and that response may wear off earlier. So I think the idea of just getting more doses indiscriminately into people's arms is not really necessarily going to solve the problem. I think we do need to focus particularly on the most elderly people and do this in a structured and strategic way in order to have the maximum impact.
So to be clear, you wouldn't move to 5 months, but you would focus on vulnerable groups. Could you elaborate on who you're thinking of?
Yes, certainly. The strategy for the booster program is somewhat similar to the strategy first time around. In other words, to start with the oldest people first and work our way down through the age groups, and at the same time focused on people who are at particularly high risk, who are younger. So it really does mirror what we did first time around. And we do need to do it in that order in order to have the maximum impact. As you get younger and younger, you're getting to people who've got stronger and stronger immune responses and who have been immunized more and more recently. And so you get to a law of diminishing returns, to a point where you're really not achieving anything at all. You're just using up your resources to boost people who don't actually need boosters at this time. But I would like to re-emphasize the fact that the vaccine program by itself, in the current situation, even if things go optimally, it is not, in my opinion, enough to bring things under control. We do need to have people using lateral flow tests, avoiding contact with large numbers of people in enclosed spaces, using masks. All of those things now need to happen if we're going to stop this rise and get things under control soon enough to stop a real meltdown in the middle of the winter.
Professor Finn, that sounds pretty clearly like you think, I know you're not responsible for making policy, but that you think we should move to Plan B now.
Well, some kind of Plan B. What I think we should stop doing, and I think we did hear this from the Secretary of State from Health last week, is a recognition that giving the message to the population that the problem's all over and that there's no need for any further restrictions or efforts being made to reduce transmission of infection is sending out the wrong message. And I worry, in fact, that the vaccine program itself is suffering as a consequence of this suggestion that somehow the problem's gone and we can all go back to normal again, because that will increasingly make people jump to the conclusion that if they've not been vaccinated, there's no real need to do it. So I do think we need to see a very different kind of message coming from the government now, that there is a serious problem and we all need to continue to contribute to reducing transmission so that we can get through the winter and the NHS can stay afloat. And absolutely, we can avoid lockdowns and the disasters that those bring. We all want to avoid that, but we can't avoid it if we all just go back to normal now.
And would a clear way of sending that message be to reimpose some restrictions, mask wearing, for example, staying away from workplaces, for example?
Well, as you said, it's not my job to create policy. I think this needs to be brought about, whether it can be brought about by clear messaging and communication. I think the British public are, by and large, a pretty responsible lot. And if you give them a clear message of what you want them to do, they will pay attention to that. Whether that's sufficient or whether it actually needs to be done by compelling people, I think that is a decision for the politicians. But one way or another, we do need to bring about a situation where there is less transmission of virus going on in the community. And we can't just rely on the vaccine program to achieve that.
Can I ask a broader question? Are you more worried at the moment about unvaccinated individuals, or about resurgence of COVID, or about the problem of conventional flu, given that there's less certainty this year about the efficacy of the flu vaccine?
Well, I don't see those things as alternatives. I think they're all true. So I'm particularly worried about the number of adults that have not been vaccinated. I'm perplexed that there are so many such people, because they are a very important group when it comes to the number of serious illnesses we're seeing, the pressure on the hospitals. And of course, they are all personally at great risk of serious illness and even death. So those are people that I think we really do need to be concerned about. And we need to focus on the communities where coverage is low, and do everything we can to make vaccine readily available and to make clear information available to people so they can make the sensible decision to get immunized. I do think we're seeing COVID cases rising at the moment, not so rapidly in terms of severe cases as before, but of course, in terms of cases overall, very large numbers. And I'm very concerned about flu this year, as is everyone else, because we had no flu last year to speak of. The population is more susceptible to flu. And that, on top of everything else now we're mixing together, could really significantly add to the pressure on the health service. So the flu vaccine program just kicking off is really important too.
Professor Finn, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot. Nice talking to you.
It is getting colder. Winter's close, and there are fears about an NHS crisis. Again, nothing new there. It is different this time in one respect. Fears around the new COVID wave we've just been discussing, bad flu season, backlogs from the last 18 months. Emergency departments are the front line, often with ambulances parked up outside them, waiting to offload patients. Katherine Henderson is the president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. She joins me now. Dr. Henderson, are you happy with the prospect of all NHS staff being compelled to have 2 jabs or being dismissed, as we're reading this morning?
So that's not something that I would be giving anything other than a personal opinion. At the moment,
Sure.
We would like staff to be vaccinated because we know that that will give them protection, and that we've seen during the waves that healthcare workers are very much in the front line of the risks as well as the treatment of the pandemic. So yes, I'm keen that people are getting vaccinated, and that needs to be clear to them, and also, to be honest, getting the booster, because actually that's the next layer, is getting a booster as well. So personally, I would be saying to everybody, think very, very carefully about not doing this, because this puts your health at risk, and therefore then additionally puts your patients at risk. So as a professional view of this would be to get vaccinated.
I ask that because, of course, anything that puts extra pressure on the department where you and your colleagues work, of course, could tip us over the edge. Do you think that emergency departments, given the situation as it is now and what we know, are going to be able to cope this winter?
We're already struggling to cope. This is not something that's coming in the next couple of months. We're already in a terrible place where we have got large queues of ambulances with vulnerable people waiting in those ambulances to be offloaded into departments, and other patients at home waiting to be picked up by the ambulance. That's the thing that really worries me, that these are patients who've not yet received treatment, that we don't necessarily know what's wrong with them, that we're really struggling to get into our healthcare facilities to then work out what we need to do. That's the real worry from my point of view, and we're already in that situation.
What do you need to alleviate the problem?
We need to have beds. So the biggest problem is exit block, both from an emergency department into hospital wards and from hospital wards back out into the community. So we need to be able to get all patients who are fit to not be in hospital back out. So the primary thing that we need is to establish enough space in community facilities or enough community support so patients can be in their own homes, so that we don't have patients in hospital who could be being cared for in a different environment. That then works itself back towards the front line, so that instead of patients being stuck in emergency departments, what we call exit block from the emergency department, we can get them out of the department and we can get new patients into our cubicles. It's a whole system problem which happens to be bottlenecked in the emergency department and therefore very visible on the ambulance ramp.
If nothing changes, can you talk to us about the seriousness of this? I mean, is this an inconvenience, or are we seeing people at risk of essentially dying because the system is blocked up?
The system is incredibly busy at the moment, when we're already reaching a point where 999 ambulance call handling is delayed. So you don't get an immediate answer to the phone when you ring 999. It takes time to get an ambulance. That puts patients at risk, because you don't know what's wrong with them. You don't know what is on the end of the phone. Is it a patient who needs care immediately as a blue light ambulance, or is it somebody who can afford to wait 20, 30, 40 minutes before they're reached? But the same is true on the ambulance ramp, unless we can get patients in and actually assess them. So that is risk of real patient harm and patients dying. So it actually really matters. This is not about an inconvenience. This is not about being patient because of a long wait. This is about people who could come to significant harm if we're not getting the care to them that they need, because there's just so many people in the system. You can't spot the needle in the haystack.
One of the issues which seems to have arisen is the question of whether people can go to their GPs or not and get face-to-face consultation. If they can't, they turn up at A&E. Do you think that there is any issue with that? And might you need to say to your GP colleagues that it's time for them to see more people face-to-face, as the Secretary of State seems to be suggesting?
Primary care is under enormous pressure as well, but the patients that we're really worried about in the emergency care system are not patients who are getting or needing necessarily a GP appointment. They're sickest patients. We're most worried about the most vulnerable patients, and those are the patients who are coming in by ambulance by and large, rather than it being an issue with primary care patients. Yes, we get stories of patients who've tried to get in touch with primary care and then maybe have come to us. But that's not the main pressure. The main pressure is people who need admission and not having a bed for them to get to. That's where our problems lie, is in exit block rather than just the volume.
I'm not going to invite you to be overly dramatic, Dr. Henderson, but everything you have told me this morning adds up to one simple statement, that it looks and sounds like and feels like that maybe people who are dying today because of the crisis that you and your members are facing.
We know that crowding is harmful to patients. We were crowded in emergency departments pre-pandemic. You said at the beginning of this, it's winter, another winter crisis. What's new? I mean, sadly, that is true. We didn't go into the pandemic in a great place in emergency care. We didn't have enough beds then. The problem is that things are worse at the moment. So we need everybody to be as careful with the healthcare resources as they possibly can be, and try and minimize the need for healthcare resources. So if we've got 8,000 patients in hospital who are suffering COVID, if we didn't have those patients, that would be another 8,000 beds in the system. So every bed that gets filled by a patient with COVID, in a sense, is in a hospital bed with a potentially avoidable disease. And that's what we need people to focus on. If we want to get through the elective backlog, everybody will know somebody who's on that list. We won't be able to do that unless we've got the beds to put those patients in. So if we can get COVID levels down, if we can make sure that the vulnerable don't get infected and then need hospital care, if we can make sure that we don't have people who are severely ill because they catch it when they're unvaccinated, all of that will help. We're all in this together to try and make it better.
Dr. Henderson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, the Treasury has the Treasury has already told us where almost £6 billion worth of funding for transport improvements in English cities is going to go. West Yorkshire is getting £830 million. This is what the Mayor of the region had to say. I welcome the £830 million, but I will be pushing for more. It's good news that the government's finally giving us the boost, which means we can start work on providing the transport system the people of West Yorkshire deserve. Well, sounds like Tracy Brabin's fairly happy with what she's going to hear in Wednesday's budget, so let's ask her now, live from Huddersfield. Tracy Brabin, the Chancellor says he's sending you a really big wad. You must be pretty cheerful this morning.
Well, good morning, Trevor. Yes, it is good news, and certainly I'm pleased that government are chiming with us about our ambitions for our region. But as you heard from Rachel earlier in your programme, this is only one part of the jigsaw. We can't talk about levelling up if we don't talk about another rail line, the Northern Powerhouse Rail, that will have that stop at St James's in Bradford. Bradford is one of the youngest cities in the whole country. We want to connect those young people to jobs and opportunities. But of course, HS2, we've had briefings and counter briefings and rumours. We absolutely need to know that that is going to happen. We need that new station in Leeds. Leeds already is at capacity. We have the land allocated. We have the ambition for it. We are ready to deliver as Labour mayors. And I'm glad government see the opportunity, and we're happy to work with them.
Well, I don't know if you heard my interview with the Chancellor earlier, Tracy Brabin, but when I asked him about the stop in Bradford and the extension to Leeds, he was, at best, I would say, enigmatic. He didn't embrace the opportunity to say, yes, and of course, look out for announcements on that. Not really that good news.
Well, we've been waiting for the integrated rail plan, as you heard from the Chancellor, for quite some time. I've been pressing for more information, but I was at the Global Investment Summit only last week and heard the Prime Minister talk specifically about Northern Powerhouse Rail. But what's important for us is that stop in Bradford. We can't have a watered-down version of our transport network. Here in West Yorkshire, we have had £174 per head spent on transport. In London, it's over £500. We have less per head than any other community across the country. We've been underfunded for decades. Now is the opportunity for government to be bold, to be ambitious, to come with us with our vision for West Yorkshire, to have that London-style transport system that will really make us that powerhouse we can be.
So you rather share Rachel Reeves' scepticism that says this is an announcement, but we're not seeing delivery yet.
Well, we're still waiting for the detail. I think there is tension potentially between number 10 and number 11, between maybe what the Prime Minister wants to see and what Rishi Sunak thinks that he can afford. But actually, it's going to cost us all not to deliver a gold-plated 5-star transport system for West Yorkshire.
Can I ask about another aspect of the spending programme, the skills proposal? There's a lot of money going to be spent on skills, and I guess some of it will go to your towns, your FE colleges and so on. But do you worry that you will be training people in Bradford and Wakefield just so that they can hop on a new rail line, if you get it, to work in Manchester?
No, that's not necessarily the whole picture, because when it comes to skills, obviously, we want young people to choose their first choice of college and not have to choose their third because they can't get to their first because there's poor transport. But what's been really interesting regarding skills, obviously it's going to be in the detail, but the government are talking about T-levels in particular, but having spent time with college principals only a couple of weeks ago, I was hearing how tricky that is with T-levels to get the right businesses, to get businesses to come on board with T-levels. I really do believe apprenticeships are the way to genuinely level up. But it is a part of a holistic picture, Trevor, that you can't level up just with skills alone. Of course, they're important. You have to have that transport system to get people to those opportunities to learning.
When we think about apprenticeships, actually, the picture hasn't been that fantastic, has it? I mean, we know that a lot of businesses, it is estimated that something like 5,000 big businesses didn't take up their full entitlement under the apprenticeship levy, and that £400 million worth of apprenticeship levy money simply expired because you can't, if you don't use it, you lose it. Is there anything that you think we need to do with the apprenticeship programme to make it more user-friendly so more people can get onto it? Because otherwise, it's a lot of noise without much substance, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. And having had a meeting with the CEO of Ocado a couple of years ago when I was the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, they pay the levy, they can't recruit. This is not right. And that's why I'm really pleased across West Yorkshire we support businesses to share that apprenticeship levy to make sure that those smaller SMEs can get the talented apprentices that they need in order to expand. But I would also say, having visited a really brilliant local company that's in aerospace, Produmax, only a couple of weeks ago, talking about apprentices, it's really important that we make sure that those from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds also get that opportunity to get an apprenticeship with a really fantastic company. That's my approach as the Mayor. We have some powers over skills, and I was able to launch a £6 million programme to have modular skills offer for those people who've been made redundant after furlough, or young people who've not been able to just get started after COVID, so that they can do shorter programmes. Because there are some challenges to full-time programmes when people have to pay their bills and earn a living. So it's really an exciting time for West Yorkshire. Finally, we have devolution. I'm 6 months into the job, but it's a point that now we're able to deliver. Obviously, we want to work with government to help them deliver on their levelling up ambitions, and we're here and we're ready to do it.
Can we turn to the other big story of the day, as it is pretty much every week, and that is COVID. The Health Secretary this week came on a bit like school headmaster and said that if we didn't do better on mask wearing and so on, then we'd all be back in detention. What's the mood in West Yorkshire?
Well, it is a really troubling time. Let's not forget that West Yorkshire has been in restrictions for most of the 18 months. Our businesses and our high streets have really suffered. So many people have lost so much over these last awful 18 months. It's troubling looking at the next few months. I was able, with my limited powers, to be able to mandate for mask wearing in bus stations. Obviously, Sadiq Khan has different powers. He could say across all of transport, mask wearing to be a priority and to be mandated. We will be working with councils to find the best way towards Christmas. But of course, let's not forget, it was councils that really supported us during the last few months, whether that was testing, tracking and tracing, finding laptops for kids that didn't have tech, rolling out the vaccination programme. This is Labour councils, particularly in West Yorkshire, that have delivered for their community. And I know we'll continue to do so and to try and keep people safe.
Tracy Brabin, politics has been consumed in the last week, if I may raise this, with the aftermath of the death of David Amos, and you yourself obviously have been close to this issue. What's your take, if I may ask for 30 seconds? Does politics need to be kinder and gentler?
Well, of course, and you'll know how I came into Parliament, that terrible tragedy when we lost Joe Cox. I said to my family, who were worried when I took up the role, it was a once-in-a-lifetime lightning strike. It would never happen again. And sadly, here we are 5 years later. Of course, politics has to be kinder. We need to also provide mental health support in our communities. People have suffered a lot. We need to make sure that there is provision to help those people who are feeling angry and frustrated. Obviously, Sir David Amess is a fine human, and certainly he was very kind to me when I was a Member of Parliament and an inveterate letter writer. I had a number of letters from him. But it's an awful time, and obviously we need to do more, and I'm really pleased that my colleagues in Westminster are taking up the mantle to make sure that we can, certainly in the online space with the online Bills White Paper, that we can, online harms white paper, that we can make sure that there is legislation to protect people.
Tracy Brabin, thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure.
Well, that's all we have time for this morning. On Wednesday, we are going to be hearing what kind of song the Chancellor will be singing. I don't suppose it's going to be, we're going to shower you with money, but we will see. And we will be back in a week's time to consider what's going to happen at COP26 in the light of all that.